Over the past few years, I've uploaded many tutorial videos on how to create and self-publish children's activity books to sell on Amazon. And these activity books include puzzle books as well as coloring books. Now, because of the vast majority of you who watch my videos are not illustrators, I taught you how to create these books using licensable artwork from Fabrica. And I have a few videos on my channel showing you how to do that. But over the years, I kept getting requests to upload videos on how to create children's picture storybooks. And I've pretty much avoided this request simply because the thought of trying to create a cohesive looking children's picture storybook while using the art from many different artists who have varying art styles just sounded like a complete nightmare to me. But after spending some time on Fabrica, I began to realize that just due to the sheer amount of content that they have on their site, pulling this off wouldn't be nearly as difficult as I had originally thought it would be. So I gave it a try. But instead of creating just a few pages to use as examples in my video, I decided to create an entire book that I could sell commercially on Amazon. The book is called Who Stepped in the Poo, and it's currently available on Amazon in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle formats. And I'll be talking more about that book a little later on. But for now, just know that the video that you're about to watch is the first in a series of videos where I'll walk you through the entire process of creating a children's picture storybook that you can sell on Amazon. This first video is going to focus primarily on how to come up with and write a good children's story. The second video in this series will cover how to find artwork on Fabrica that not only fits your story, but that works well with all of the other artwork that you're going to be using. Remember, you're going to be using artwork from many different artists throughout the book, so you're going to have to be very careful about what artwork you choose if you want your book to look consistent. Not all styles of illustration are going to work well together. I'm also going to be showing you how to composite all of the different clip art together while adjusting both the color and the value of the illustrations so that you can get that cohesive look that you're trying to achieve throughout your book. And all of this will be done in either Photoshop or by using the free Photoshop alternative, photop.com. And finally, I'll show you how to lay out the finished illustrations along with your text inside of the BookBolt Studio using spreads. I'll also be uploading additional videos after that cover topics like how to upload your book to KDP while you're using both licensed as well as AI-generated artwork. Plus, tutorial videos that'll give you some quick tips on how to work with more complicated artwork, as well as how to convert your paperback book into an ebook for the Kindle reader. So if all of this is something that you'd be interested in learning, then stick around. Hey guys, Craig here. Hope everybody's doing well. Okay, so before we get started, I just want to do one quick little shameless plug for my new children's picture book, Who Stepped in the Poo. It's a funny little story about a bunch of animals on a Kalamazoo farm who desperately have to find the culprit that unknowingly stepped into a somewhat famous pile of poo. And then once they find him, things just go downhill from there as the stinky stepper tries to remove the poo from his shoe. So if you have a 4 to 8 year old with a smelly sense of humor, or you just want to get some ideas on how to lay out illustrations for your own children's picture storybook, and you want to support my channel at the same time, you can pick up a copy of the book on Amazon, and I have a link to it in the description section of this video. And if you are nice enough to purchase a copy, I also ask that you please show it some love in the Amazon review section after you've read it. Unless of course you hated it, then just forget I asked. That being said, let's get started. Okay, so even though I'm not going to be doing anything involving artwork in this video, I will still need to use Fabrica, and you'll see why in just a minute. So for those of you who don't know what Fabrica is, it's a digital graphics website from which you can license everything from character illustrations, scenery art, themed clip art props, custom fonts, and so much more. There are literally millions of graphics on this site, and that number keeps growing every single month. And the great news is, all of this content can be used for commercial projects, which means whatever you create, you can sell on Amazon. And just know that I have a link in the description section of this video where you can take advantage of 2 exclusive offers. The first is to sign up for free, and in doing so, you'll get your first 10 downloads for free. The second offer is a 1-year subscription for just $47. That's just $3.99 per month, and that gets you unlimited downloads for the entire year. And if you take advantage of this offer, that $47 per year rate will be your renewal rate for life. And as I said, I have links to both of these offers in the description section of this video. Now before I move on, I just want to point something out. When I created my book, I downloaded over 220 clip art bundles from this site. I didn't use them all, but I was testing different graphics out to see what would work. Those 220 bundles would have cost me around $250 if I hadn't purchased the one-year subscription for $47. Creating a children's picture book this way requires a lot of trial and error, and having unlimited access to over 10 million graphic packs all for one low price is a game changer. If you're serious about doing this, don't waste your money on buying individual assets. Get the one-year unlimited access for $47 and save yourself hundreds of dollars. Take advantage of this incredible offer from Creative Fabrica by using the links in the description section below this video. Now that that's out of the way, let's get started. Most children's stories follow a fairly similar story arc. They start by introducing the main character or characters, then they give a description, either written or verbally, of the setting to try to help establish the scene. And finally, they define the problem that the main character is going to have to find a solution to. All of this usually happens within the first few pages of pretty much every children's picture storybook. As the story progresses, the plot is further developed by introducing obstacles that the main character must overcome. The bigger the obstacles, the better the story. This is referred to as the hero's journey. At this point, you'd be about 2/3 into the book. And the final third of the book should cover what actions the character took to solve the problem, as well as describe what the character's life is like now that the problem has been solved. And if you sit down and read most children's books, this is pretty much the format that they follow. There may be some twists and turns thrown in for comic effect or shock value, and those things will vary based on the theme of the book, but for the most part, that'll be the overall anatomy of the story. And you can see this in many popular children's books. Take The Adventures of Beakle by Danson Tat. The book starts off by introducing you to the character Beakle, and by telling you about the island where he lives, which is filled with imaginary friends. The book also fills you in on Beakle's problem. He needs a real child to give him a special name so that he can have a real friend. Now, because this doesn't happen for a while, he decides to take matters into his own hands, and he sets off on his hero's journey into the big city. This journey has him facing a lot of different obstacles, until one day he comes across a park filled with children. He decides that this is the place where he'll find a friend, which he eventually does. The book then goes into detail explaining what Beakle had to do to make that friend. And finally, the story ends by telling you how great Beakle's life is now that he has a real friend. So as you can see, it's the exact same story arc. Now, even though the story arc is always pretty much the same, it doesn't always parse out the same. In other words, the story isn't always broken up so that the first third of the book is the introduction, the second third of the book is the hero's journey, and the final third is the solution as well as the outcome. A case in point is the children's book The Day the Crayons Quit by Drew DeWalt and Oliver Jeffers. In this book, you're introduced to the character Duncan on the very first page. Then for the next 24 pages, you're given a very detailed explanation of what Duncan's problem is. All of his crayons are angry about the way Duncan only uses them for certain drawings. And they feel that they're being misused, so they write letters of protest to him. 90% of this book is spent establishing the problem that Duncan is facing, and that's done by reading all of the letters of protest that have been written by each color of crayon. And it's only on the last 4 pages of the book that Duncan comes up with a solution, which is to use all of the crayons in one drawing. Then he implements the solution by creating the drawing. And as for what Duncan's life is like after that, well, his crayons are happy and his teacher gives him an A+ for creativity. So you can see that it's still the same story arc. We're introduced to the character first, told what the problem is, and in this case, the explanation of the problem is intertwined with the hero's journey. Because we're reading about all of the obstacles that Duncan is going to have to overcome to make the crayons happy. Then at the very end of the book, the character comes up with a solution, and we're briefly told what life is like after the problem is solved. So again, it's the same story arc. Introduction to the character, establishing the setting as well as the problem. Next comes the hero's journey, and finally, we get the solution as well as the outcome. So as you're writing your own children's book, this is the story arc you want to stick to. The book that I just created follows this same story arc. The book starts by establishing the setting, the farm. It then goes in to introduce many of the characters, which are the farm animals, and then pinpoints the problem, which is that somebody stepped in the poo. This is where the hero journey starts. But there are actually 2 hero's journeys in my book. The first is the journey of the farm animals as they try to find the culprit who stepped in the poo. The second is the journey of the mule as he tries to remove the poo from his shoe. Finally, a solution to the problem is found. And then as for what life is like after the problem is solved, well, this is where I wrote in somewhat of a dark twist to the end of the story. Unfortunately, you're just going to have to read the book to find out how it ends. But the good news is it's available on Amazon, and I have links to it in the description section of this video. Okay, so normally when you're creating a children's picture storybook, you start the process by writing the story. Once you have the story hashed out, then you create illustrations that both complement and assist in telling the story that you just wrote. And normally you would just create the illustrations yourself or hire a professional illustrator to do it for you. But because we're going to be using stock art from Creative Fabrica to illustrate our book, we're going to have to take a slightly different approach. Most children's storybooks revolve around a main character. And since most children's storybooks are at least 45 pages long, that character will have to appear in the book on at least 80% of the pages. This means that you're going to need around 36 different variations as far as pose and facial expression of that main character for your book. Because you don't want to be using the exact same picture of your main character throughout your entire book. That would be bad. And this brings us to our first problem. Most of the artists who are posting on Creative Fabrica are not posting continuous character art. In other words, you'd be very hard-pressed to find a character bundle that had 35 renders of the exact same character in different poses and with different facial expressions. Even in my own book, although I do have a primary character, which is the mule who stepped in the poo, spoiler alert, that character isn't introduced into the story until around page 31, and I intentionally did it that way because I simply didn't have enough variations of that character to have him appear throughout the entire book. So how do we get around this? It's simple. Instead of writing a story that revolves around just one character, we're going to write a story that revolves around a group of characters. A good example of this style of writing is Dan Solberg's book, Shadow Abuse. Every page of this book has a different character on it, so the story is not about any one character. It's actually about many different characters that abuse their shadows. Every page contains a different character as well as a different story of abuse. But even though the story is about many different characters, it still has one cohesive underlying theme to it. So rather than writing a story about the life and journey of one elf, write a story about the life and journey of a group of elves. Rather than spotlight the life of one particular gnome, write about what the life is like for all gnomes. Writing this way will not only allow you to inject different characters throughout the pages of your books, but it'll also give you the option to jump to different themes as well. So you could write a Christmas story about gnomes, or you could just write a story that's about what it's like to be a gnome all year round. This will allow you to use artwork that has a different theme to it in the same book, which dramatically opens up your options when you're creating your book. And there's one more advantage of creating your book this way. One of the hardest parts of writing a story is coming up with ideas and inspiration. But when you can actually see the finished artwork before you even start writing the story, the process gets way easier. Normally you write this story while trying to envision the characters as well as their mannerisms and facial expressions. But when you do it this way, because all of the finished artwork is right there in front of you, you're actually going to be writing your story around the artwork. This makes the task so much easier. I was able to write the story for Who Stepped in the Poo in about 15 minutes. I knew how the characters were going to react and what they were going to say based purely on their facial expressions. So all you really need to do to write your children's story is start by picking a set of characters as well as a theme. And there are thousands to choose from on Creative Fabrica. In addition to elves and gnomes, you could write a story about birds, or dogs, or fairies, or unicorns, or fish, or any other living thing on the planet. And there are also tons of background images that you can put these characters on top of to create a cohesive scene. And if you need some extra props, there are thousands of those as well on Creative Fabrica. Your only limitation is your own imagination. Now remember, even though you're using all of these different images to illustrate your book, you're still going to be sticking to that same story arc. Just start by introducing the characters, the setting, and the problem, create some obstacles to overcome on the hero's journey, and then finally give the solution and show what life is like afterwards. On a side note, if you decide to make your story rhyme, write it like a limerick rather than a story. And the reason for this is because when you write a limerick, you're always very conscious of how many syllables are in each line. You do this because if you have too many syllables, the timing of the limerick will be off. Don't just write long drawn-out sentences that have a word at the end that happens to rhyme with the last word of the previous sentence. That's not how to properly write a rhyming book. I read a children's storybook the other day and was about 15 pages into the book before I even realized it was rhyming. And that was simply because the sentences were too long and they weren't following the pattern of a limerick. A limerick has a very distinct pattern to it. It's broken up into 5 lines and goes something like this. Ta-da-ta-da-ta-da, ta-da-ta-da-ta-da, ta-da-ta-da-ta-da-ta-da-ta-da-ta-da. So there are 5 lines in the pattern, and the way it works is the last word of the first 2 lines should rhyme with each other. Then the last word of the 3rd and 4th lines should rhyme with each other. And finally, the last word of the 5th line should rhyme with the last word of the 1st and 2nd lines. Now, I don't always use a full limerick pattern when I write. There are usually 5 lines in a limerick, and sometimes I only use the last 3. But I will occasionally use the full limerick pattern throughout the book. Let me give you an example from my own book. If you listen, you'll hear that pattern that I just showed you, and pay attention to the words that rhyme. I'm almost always using rhyming words at the end of each line of the pattern. Now in this first part, I'm only using the last 3 lines of the limerick pattern. So once again, that pattern goes like this. Ta-da-da-da, ta-da-da-da, ta-da-da-da-da-da. Now you would think that a sign, with a fancy design, would keep all the animals away. Yet somehow that poo had the print of a shoe by the end of that very same day. When word got around that a print had been found in that stinky old pile of poo, the animals gossiped to all of their friends, as animals quite often do. So as you can see in that section, I'm only using the last 3 lines of the limerick pattern. Also take note that unlike an actual limerick, you don't necessarily have to break the pattern up into 5 individual sentences. You can put multiple lines of the pattern in the same sentence. Now in the second section, I'm going to use the entire 5-line limerick pattern, which is ta-da-da-da-da-da, 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 ta-da-da-da-da-da-da. So listen up. Somebody stepped in the poo. Somebody stepped in the poo? Why on earth would anyone want to step in a pile of poo? Even though the last 3 lines of the limerick pattern all appear in one sentence, the cadence of the pattern is still there. Also take note that the last words of the 3rd and 4th line of the pattern don't rhyme. Why on earth would anyone want to step in a pile of poo? Earth and want don't rhyme, but that's okay. The cadence of the pattern is still there. You can play around with this pattern and just have fun with it. Your story doesn't always have to adhere strictly to the limerick pattern, but the cadence or the tempo of the lyric pattern should always be present in your writing. If you need a little inspiration for writing rhymes, read a couple of Dr. Seuss books. He was a master at it. And if you need some further inspiration just for writing children's stories in general, go to the public library and plop yourself down in the children's section and just start reading some of the books. But it may be a good idea to actually bring a kid with you, or people might start looking at you funny. I won't make that mistake again. Or you can just get yourself a subscription to Kindle Unlimited and download as many ebooks as you want. Either way, just get inspired. So to recap, all you have to do is head over to Creative Fabrica and pick out a set of characters as well as a theme that you want to write a book about. Then, using all of the character art that's available to you, just try and come up with a funny story based on the character's facial expressions and mannerisms. It's not a bad idea to create an account before you start doing this. That way, if you come across artwork that you like as you're writing your story, you can just save it to your favorites folder, and then you won't have to search for it later on. Don't be in a rush to write this story. Just let the illustrations guide you. Now in the next video, I'm going to show you how to composite all of these images together in Photoshop so that you can get a cohesive overall look to your book. But until that video is uploaded, your homework is to head over to Creative Fabrica and just figure out what it is you want to write about. And remember, I have links to those special offers from Creative Fabrica in the description section of this video. Now once that second video is finished, you'll be able to find a link to it right here. But until that time, be sure and check out my Self-Publishing 101 playlist. It has everything you need to get your self-publishing business up and running today. Until next time, take care.